So we could start maybe with just introducing ourselves, if you don't mind, saying your name, maybe
Sure,
your preferred pronouns if you like, and what you do for the college. Uh,
sure, absolutely.
that'd be
Yeah,
great.
so my name is Tim Ryan. I'm the director of athletics at Bowdoin. I use he, him, and his pronouns. I've been at Bowdoin since 2005, and I'm in my ninth year as the director of athletics. And I oversee our 31 varsity athletic programs and our athletic facilities, and work with a great staff to help support our student athletes and intramural and club sports on campus. And I also graduated from Bowdoin. I was a member of
I
the class of
didn't know that.
1998. Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
So I have a deep
Wow.
affection for the institution and the state of Maine, and just feel really fortunate to be in the position that I'm in.
Wow. Well, much appreciation for all you do, Tim. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I'm Roland Mendiola. I'm a licensed psychologist and the interim director for counseling and wellness. I use he, him, his pronouns. And this project we started that we're naming Elephants in the Room, is really with the intention of just simply allowing people the opportunity to hear voices across the college that they might not hear on a more personal level, and particularly exploring the intersection of mental health, um, social stigma, personal identity, and culture, and just looking at how who we are, where we come from, informs our relationship to our well-being, our emotional lives. And
Great.
again, like I mentioned, I think it's a great time to sit and reflect on this. I think that's where a lot of us are. So I think it's great to hear where different people are at with it.
I appreciate the invitation. Look forward to talking with you.
So just to start off, first question would be, did you grow up talking about mental, emotional health? If so, how? Or if not, like how do you explain that, or what was your sense
Sure.
of that?
Yeah, absolutely. In thinking about our conversation today, it gave me a chance to reflect upon my upbringing, and really mental health and mental well-being, and was not something that was really ever talked about, whether that was in my family setting, or throughout my elementary school, junior high, high school, and college experience. And it really was something that I wasn't overly aware of until coming to Bowdoin as a student, and then kind of moving on, and certainly now
Mhm.
working at Bowdoin, and helping to support students and awareness of the resources here on campus, and things along those lines. And I grew up. My dad was a high school football and baseball coach, was a high school athletic director in Maine for a long time, and grew up in a very athletic culture. And I think athletic culture and some of the things that help people to be successful as athletes um, tend to build barriers for people to feel vulnerable, and look to think about mental well-being as and exercise as something that would be of benefit
Mm.
to them. And I think that is something that over time I've become much more aware of. But certainly growing up, thinking about reaching out to someone for a conversation, or a counselor, or meditating, a whole
Mhm.
host of different things, was just something that was not even on the radar screen for me during my youth.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd love you to say more about. I think that might come off, I think for a lot of us, pretty obvious, or just not unexpected. That that's the case in athletic culture, at least historically. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's interesting. What comes to mind too, honestly, is that sometimes I'll use these metaphors in therapy or in counseling with students, and talk about how um, we exercise ourselves in different ways, and a lot of practice is involved, training is involved, in all kinds of way athletically, and why wouldn't the same apply for our mental emotional lives? Sometimes we use this metaphor of like stretching ourselves
Right.
emotionally through practice and training. whether it's through meditation or other kinds of interventions. But what's your sense of why that is? I mean, yeah, in your experience, why is
Yeah.
it about the
Yeah. And, I grew up I was in high school in the early 90s. And, um, this probably still continues to some extent today, but a lot of the focus in the athletic arena is on the physical, like the body image, body type, ability to perform in a lot of sports, being able to exhibit either strength or endurance in various ways. And confidence is a key factor oftentimes in thinking about performance. So there is, whether it's real or false, a bravado that ends up being carried, I think, by a lot of people in the athletic community, which just doesn't necessarily lend itself to naturally then lead into a vulnerability. And the focus largely has been on the physical component, as opposed to, like you were saying, exercising the mind, which I think over time people have realized is as important, if not more important, than the physical characteristics that you have in terms of leading to exceptional performance, whether that's in an exam in a classroom or whether that's on a playing field. So I think to some extent my personal history is a function of the generation that I grew up in, which was more focused on the physical attributes rather than the mental attributes.
Yeah. I appreciate it. You mentioned body image too, specifically. Would you add anything else to that? I would love to hear any thoughts you have about where that stands in the athletic culture too.
Yeah, I think it runs the gamut across
Sure.
various sports where, in some sports, being, you think about football and offensive and defensive linemen and being large. Oftentimes, when you look at the NFL, there are very large, obese men
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in that sport.
Yeah.
And there are body images associated with size dynamics there. And then there are a whole host of other sports where body image can be a real concern, whether it is around the nature of a uniform that someone wears while they're performing,
Yep.
and being on display, not just in front of your friends and family and teammates, but
Yeah.
complete strangers.
Yeah.
And in the world that we live in today, where a lot of contests are either broadcast on TV or in our world broadcast over the internet, that is something that I think is ever present in people's minds, and really just trying to emphasize for people being comfortable with who they are, and that no one needs to be perfect or really should aspire to necessarily be perfect, and that we all are our own individuals, and that our performance will be what it will be based upon our own individual body type.
It does seem to keep coming back to that. I have to say the sense of learning to be who you are, and the natural confidence that comes from that, just as much as confidence from other places as well.
And it's hard, oftentimes even in Division III athletics, not even thinking about Division I athletics, oftentimes the people who come to our teams were the best players on their high school teams or the best players in their conference in high school. And then you get here and everybody else is as good, if not better. And then that does lead, I think, oftentimes to some questioning of oneself, and that plays into a whole host of mental well-being and physical well-being challenges, and it really, as you were saying, comes down to confidence in self and being comfortable with who we are, and that's okay.
Yeah. So if I can ask Tim, for you personally, and I forgot to mention this earlier, I have found having these conversations, whatever level of detail, specifics that people want to get into, what they're comfortable with, always works perfectly. I totally encourage you to trust that. Don't feel like you need to overshare.
Sure.
But for you personally, what would you say your relationship is now to what we call mental emotional health, or your emotional?
Sure. Yeah, so I do try to step away from the work environment for at least a half an hour a day, and that would be without a podcast or any other
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stimuli, I guess, as a way to kind of reset the clock to think, about not just things that are going on in the world or in work or what have you, but just to digest and have a little sense of calm. I think that over time I have valued that time much more so than I did when I was younger.
yeah,
And I don't know if that technically would qualify as a meditating exercise, but it's very therapeutic for me.
yeah.
Um, I also find great comfort in nature. So I'm a big fly fisherman. So I fly fish and stand in the river and enjoy that as much as I possibly can. And that, for me, just being away for a couple of days can really reset the clock. And
Hmm.
I do really, really enjoy that. Um, and I have with various challenges that extended family have endured. Have utilized counselors to be of help to me and my family, and I think that was for whatever reason stigma associated with getting over the hump of saying, you know what, I do need some help and this would be beneficial to me. And I'm comfortable with people knowing that, and I hope that as I talk with staff members or things or students, I'm very comfortable sharing that, because hopefully then that helps someone else feel
Yeah,
comfortable moving in that direction.
yeah,
And it was incredibly beneficial.
yeah. Honestly, that comes through, Tim, and the even little interaction I tend to have with you, that level of comfort you have addressing some of these things. And one of the things having these conversations too, I get super curious about is like, was there like an arc for you, like a process for you to get more comfortable with these things, as well as prioritizing this meditative time for yourself, or sort of rejuvenating time for yourself?
Yeah, I think one of my mentors is Tim Foster, who's the former dean of students at Bowdoin, and
Sure,
he
sure.
really emphasized people taking the time to take care of themselves. And um, when I first graduated from Bowdoin, I went into banking, and that was a very driven, focused career. And then here in coaching, and it really wasn't until I worked with Tim more directly when I was the athletic director at Bowdoin that I got to hear more about his philosophy of self care and putting some boundaries around your personal life and your work life and the importance of taking care of that. And so I'm grateful to
Yeah,
him. So it
that,
really, I would say, has been in the last 10 years, really, where I have felt comfortable giving myself the flexibility to take the time to take care of myself, whether that, and this varies, speaking of body image in terms of healthy eating and things along those lines, that goes in a cycle for sure. But from a mental perspective,
but
trying to focus
yeah,
on, taking care of yourself. So it certainly wasn't something that, the light bulb went off when I was, in college or things along those lines. I
yeah,
think it was later in life for me.
yeah, and speaks super well. I think it's a important message to be out there of the role of mentors and mentorship.
For sure. And the impact that you can have, on people, and, that concept of paying it forward and, taking what you've learned and have benefited from someone else, and then hopefully being able to share that. And, it may not um, be ideal for everyone who you encounter, but even if you help one person,
Yeah,
that certainly makes it well worth it.
and what I find, what I hear a lot is, that it might not be the immediate impact, that it just like something kind of clicks at some point, or maybe after a few messages, or something
Absolutely.
sits with you for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my great friends in the athletic director community is Aaron Quinn, who's the AD at Middlebury.
Mm,
And Aaron, he meditates daily. He's very in tune with great podcasts to listen to and things along those lines. And he speaks openly and has done exercises with our athletic director group at our conference meetings. And um, him being as open as he is about taking care of his own mental well-being has helped me become more comfortable in taking care of my own. So both Tim and Aaron have been great mentors to me. And it does speak to the power of seeing someone demonstrate comfort and the impact I can have on other people.
That's right. That's right. The comfort, I imagine, like, again, the confidence in being able to just do that and maybe even go against the grain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, that when Aaron ran a couple exercises for us in the last, 12 to 18 months or so. And um, I'm willing to bet that was the first time that had happened at a NESCAC athletic director meeting. It's just probably something that hadn't happened historically. And so that was a big step forward, I think, in having the confidence to lead those sessions. And the way in which the group was receptive to those initiatives, I think, too, speaks highly of the quality of the people in the room.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Tim, to give people some perspective, maybe what would be like a snapshot of you before you started, before 10 years ago and before you started doing this for yourself? What was it like for you typically?
Yeah. Pretty intense, pretty solely focused on work and results more so than process, probably, I would say. Not as focused on family commitments, work always taking a priority over family commitments, which just isn't a sustainable model for healthy relationships. So I think in taking better care of myself, it ends up taking better care of other people as well, which is something that I'm really happy that I've done. So not that the passion for the work has changed at all, or the commitment for the work has changed.
It doesn't have to. Right.
But you can have both. It's just a matter of focusing time and place on yourself and also on your work.
Yeah. The value of work, not at the expense of, particularly, I think we talk about this a lot with students, relationships in general, relationship with self, relationship with close people in our lives.
And I think when you're first getting started, whether it's first getting started as a student at Bowdoin or first getting started in a career after graduating from Bowdoin, there's so much focus on I have to do well, I have to get on the right foot. And at times, relationships may suffer from that focus. And, I think that continuing to focus on relationship development, because relationships don't maintain on their own, they need to be cultivated. And I think that's an important thing to focus on. And I wish I had kind of recognized that earlier, but I'm glad that I have that approach now.
Tim, anything else you would say about bringing it back to, and you alluded to this, anything else you would say about who you are, where you come from, how you grew up, informs the journey you've had in terms of your health and well-being?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in a predominantly white small town in Maine that is fairly conservative. And I think that conservativeness probably played into a lack of awareness or interest in well-being concepts at the time.
I don't even think we had that word.
I don't think we did. I don't think we did either. Yeah, exactly. So I think that was a influence on me early in life. I think being at Bowdoin as a student was an incredibly positive influence on me in terms of exposure to ideas, people, and that covers the whole gamut, socioeconomic, race, geography, you name it. So that was a coming of age time for me, I think, in a lot of ways, and I'm very grateful for that. And I grew up I often say that I came to Bowdoin thinking that I was middle class, and then quickly realized that we were towards the bottom of middle class if we were there. And I think, and I did not have much of an awareness of socioeconomic
Yeah.
status until I came to Bowdoin, because I was just happy with what we had.
How was it
And
realizing?
it was challenging, the cars that I saw that were being driven around campus were nicer than the cars that my parents had at home. And the things that were hard for me in terms of, people used to run around the dorms and sell T-shirts for $10 with some, logo on the back or something. Like, I didn't have $10 to buy a T-shirt, and some people did, and that was really hard. And I think that, um, to me, played into a challenge that I faced as I graduated from Bowdoin and first went into banking in New York City. And it created, I think, in my mind, a need to demonstrate wealth beyond what I had, and led to some challenging financial um, uh, issues, just because I was living beyond my means when I was in New York. And New York's an expensive place, but I think
Yeah.
feeling as though I needed to live up to a standard from what I saw while I was at Bowdoin, and then being in New York. And again, with the benefit of hindsight, you realize that that was not, something that needed to be done, or should have been done. I should have been more comfortable, with myself. But that definitely was a challenge, and that is something that, as I reflect, I'm happy that over time I was able to move into a more positive direction in that
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah. It totally brings up, this is a theme that I think has been around in the work that we do for a while, but I feel like it's intensifying, and even particularly this semester, hearing from different students, highly capable, highly successful students at Bowdoin, basically talking about, whether or not they allude to it or are very explicit about it, basically saying that feeling like their sense of self, their sense of self-worth is completely tied up with measures of success, particularly academic, but possibly otherwise as well.
Right.
I was wondering if you might say anything about that, like, because I feel like this is part of what we're talking about, and that you could have both actually, but
Yeah, for sure. So, I was using the financial analogy, but the academic one certainly, at Bowdoin and other higher education institutions, I think, is a challenge. And it's tough, because you don't want to restrain people's interest and desire to
right,
perform well and be
right,
successful.
right,
It's just, let's trying to think about ways to do that where it's healthy, for you and for others, and the people who you're close with. And when they see you struggling, that then impacts their own
that's right,
well-being.
right,
And um, it's it's okay to not necessarily be, you know, the top performer in everything that you do. A team analogy is that it takes a lot of people on a team, whether you're a practice player on a basketball team who only helps the 8 or 9 people who play a lot of minutes get ready for games. Like, your role is incredibly important, and you should see and feel the value in that. Much like if you're not necessarily performing at the top of a particular class that you're taking, you're contributing, you're helping others learn, and you're benefiting from that experience. So it's tough, because the world is hyper competitive,
it's, yes,
and it's just about, I think, over time, learning to find that balance, and not necessarily settling for
right.
poor performance, but being comfortable when you've given your best, that's okay, and then the results will be what the results are.
and and that's just it. I would love to hear you comment from your own perspective about how to do that well, like how to give everything you have, or the best of your ability at the time, and at some level be comfortable with the outcome, however it goes.
Yeah, I think that's
How do
where
we do, how do, we do that? How do students do
yeah, I think that's where focusing more on process rather than results can be helpful. So if you take the preparing for an exam analogy, did you kind of put a plan in place to manage your time to allow yourself to prepare? Did you actually spend the time to prepare? Do you felt like you were prepared? And maybe questions are asked on the exam that for whatever reason you just didn't prepare for, but you felt like you had a process, you went through the process, and then the results end up being what they are. It's much like, with a team getting ready for a contest. And
Yeah,
if you feel comfortable that you put the work in, and that you had a plan, that's what you can control. And then really once, the balls start bouncing or the questions start flying, so to some extent, that's a little out of your control. You can control the extent to which you prepare for
yeah,
something, and then
right,
and then being comfortable that I prepared, and
yeah,
maybe I got asked a question, or maybe a team ran a play that we just had never seen before and
yeah.
we got burned by it. Okay, they won that round, and we're going to prepare and be ready for the next one.
And learning to not take it personally, right? When things are out of
Right.
our control and don't go the way we had hoped.
Yeah, absolutely. And that in the vast majority of experiences, there's going to be another opportunity to come back and either face that challenge, or take an exam, or whatever the situation may be.
Yeah,
There'll be another opportunity down the road where you'll be able to prepare and then perform, and then let things play themselves out. But yes, not feeling as though your self-worth and your identity is completely tied to a singular event or a singular performance, I think is an incredibly important skill to have.
yeah. Tim, with the image of the elephant in the room, like the example of mental health, I think in a lot of ways to this day. Um, Other kinds of elephants in the room, issues that go unspoken, that feel important for you to highlight right now, that resonate for you, that may resonate for students right now?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but just vulnerability in general. I
Yeah,
think people are shy about showing vulnerability, and in a community like ours where people are high achieving, it can be difficult to say I don't know, and to say I need to learn a little bit more about that. And we've been focusing a lot of conversations in our department on race and being allies for our students of color within our community, and in a lot of ways we've talked about being vulnerable, and having an incredible amount of respect for students who come to talk to us when they are vulnerable, and
yeah,
sharing our own vulnerability with them, and how that can help build trusting relationships that
yeah,
go beyond surface level conversation. So vulnerability can come in many different forms, but I think that's something that this year I think has been top of mind for me, and it's something that we hadn't necessarily really talked a lot about in the athletic context. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind for me.
how has that gone? Because I think for a lot of people the immediate questions come up of like, okay, I mean that sounds, I don't know, it makes sense. How do I do that? How do I do that well? Why should I do that? Why should I take
Yeah,
the initiative to do that?
yeah. Well, I think the why behind it is that you're creating a opening and inviting space for whether that's a student or a staff member or a friend, to then be vulnerable with you as well, and you're demonstrating that you're exhibiting trust for them, which then hopefully will make it easier for them to then trust you in return. And I think trust is a really important thing for us to have with one another as staff members, and with relationships that we have with students. And it's not an easy thing to just automatically flip a switch and say, hey, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable tomorrow. I think it's something that we practice, and we get better at over time, and each person is on their own journey in terms of their willingness and ability to be vulnerable. But if we're not paying attention to that, then I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves, and to people who are close to us that we're hoping to support.
Yeah, yeah. I'm smiling because again, I feel like that's one of the things that I feel like it so much boil down to, which is trust. Along with the confidence that we brought up earlier. Yeah, just like what it takes for good relationships to happen and be sustainable over time.
And without that trust, when a relationship hits a rocky spell, it's much harder for people to stay invested in those relationships. So it's important that you have that trust established, so that if and when a bumpy time comes, you're in a position to be able to navigate that road together.
Yeah.
And to come out in a better place on the other side. We've talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah. It's amazing though, just watch, in ourselves, and I think in other people, just like the back and forth of like who's gonna put down their walls first, or who's gonna start opening up a little differently first, and give a little more permission. It's a funny dance.
It is a funny dance, and it's a little unnatural, right? Because I think we all are a little self-conscious about opening ourselves up to other people, and it doesn't come naturally, which then makes it difficult. But what I have found is that time helps, and frequency of conversation and contact helps. Being able to find some sort of commonality in a bunch of different areas helps, and then you're able to kind of start the process of showing more of yourself. And I think that by showing more of yourself, you then demonstrate that you're interested in hearing more about the person or people who you are developing relationships with. And I think that can be helpful, and it's a process that just takes some time.
It does. And yeah, and so much potential for being rewarding. I say sometimes to clients that I work with that part of why I became a therapist was that, like, from a young age, like, life always struck me as odd and weird, and I wanted to understand that in different ways. And part of one of the ways I think it's particularly odd, even though it's like so basic, right, is that we all have an internal experience and we have an outside experience, and that if we didn't open up ever, if we didn't share, you would never know what's going on inside me, and I would never know what's going on inside you. Right. If I never took the time and never took the initiative, if I didn't try to build some kind of trust or communication, you just wouldn't know.
Right. Yeah, it's like the analogy of the duck swimming, where all the work is going on underneath the water. I think that internal piece that you were just talking about, that's where a lot of the work goes on. And I think to be able to nurture the work that's being done internally, it's very beneficial to be able to share some of that, and the get it off your chest kind of concept. And to hear sharing invites others to offer insight and opinion, which then takes us beyond just thinking about what we may individually be thinking or working on, and ends up in a better work product than what would have happened if it was just an internal exercise. So there's benefits to the individual in that situation, and there's benefits to whatever community you may be involved with as well.
But again, how many of us have just learned the lesson our whole lives that just to rely on our own advice or our own, you know?
Yeah, and for sure, I can remember, growing up, the just keep your head down, keep your head down and keep working. And you know, to some extent, the grind it out kind of mentality can be beneficial. It
It's
also can
necessary
be
sometimes.
problematic
Yeah.
as well in terms of you know what can be built up over time. But yeah, that whole just keep your head down and get the work or get the job done, um, is something that, yeah, can definitely end up being problematic.
Tim, any other messages before we end today? Any other messages you want to express and have students who listen to this hear? Just any messages related to what they might be going through, what they might need to hear at a time like this that we're all
Yeah,
be collectively
sure.
going through.
Yeah, so two things. I am a firm believer in the power of positive thinking, and I really try to keep a positive outlook. And that has been challenging, at various times, not just recently, but at various times. But I really think that can be beneficial both for our own personal well-being and the well-being of people around us, and the attitude and the presence that we project. We want to be authentic, obviously, but um, having a positive outlook on things doesn't mean that everything's going to end up being okay,
Right.
but it can help you along the way of navigating a process. And then the other thing that I often share with colleagues is just um, to work the problem and not the person.
Mhm.
And that is more of in a kind of work context, and where you may have a conflict with someone in a different department who doesn't want to agree to do what you're asking them to do or what have you, and really that speaks to not developing personal agita towards other people and really just focusing on the problem, and that helps, I think, to lead towards solutions getting done, and helps towards building and maintaining long-term relationships. And that also can be hard because it can be frustrating when either someone is expounding a political view that you may disagree with, or in the example I just shared, is not looking to agree to do something that you're asking them to do, but really focusing on the problem and not the person themselves, I think has been something that's been beneficial for me over time.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, of course.
I I I feel like I've really benefited from this conversation, and I fully expect other people to as well.
I hope so, and I appreciate the invitation, and it's been great to get a chance to catch up with you.
Yeah, I hope to invite you again. I feel like we could have had a whole conversation about a number of these things, including, well, can I ask, even just a minute, like,
Sure.
how would you say the conversations have been going so far when it comes to vulnerability in athletics? It's a piece
Yeah,
I was maybe going to wait on, and we could probably have a whole conversation, but would you comment on that even just?
sure. Yeah, no, I think that myself personally, and I think our staff are moving in a really positive direction. And I think with more conversation comes additional comfort, and um, witnessing peers and colleagues demonstrate vulnerability breeds additional comfort as well for others who may have historically been less comfortable to then show vulnerability. And I think that's an incredibly important aspect of being an ally for our students and with our staff. So all of us have work to
Yeah.
do, but I am really pleased with the commitment on the part of our staff, and the progress that we have made over the last several months.
Well, I really appreciate Tim from an outside perspective, and being able to interact with you, at least somewhat on a regular basis. I really appreciate how much you've invited and welcomed that kind of work into it, and
Absolutely.
yeah, just getting to things on a deeper level.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about getting below the surface,
Yeah,
and I think that is helpful for us in terms of our own development, but also in terms of the relationships that we're developing with our coaches, and also the environment into which we aspire to bring prospective students that we're talking to. And I
yeah,
think that we've talked about being more intentional about sharing what's really important to us and our values and the type of commitment and community that someone would be coming into as an athlete at Bowdoin. And I think that we're going to be better prepared to support our students going forward through the work that we've been doing so far this fall. So
yeah, I
um,
think so.
it's an exciting time, I think, to be a member of our department, and I'm incredibly optimistic.
It's just excellent to hear. Thanks again, Tim. I really appreciate you taking the time and putting these messages out there in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, more
American
than happy
athlete.
to do it. And thank you again for the invitation.